This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
On June 21st, 1978, 22-year-old Carla Brown was found brutally murdered in the basement of her home. It looked as if the killer had committed the perfect crime. And police could find very little evidence. But years later, investigators noticed something on a crime scene photograph that had previously been overlooked. The killer had left behind a clue. "22-year-old Carla Brown and her fiancé, a man we'll call Mark Hart, had recently purchased a home together in Wood River, Illinois. Although the couple had a rocky past, friends and family saw this as the beginning of a new phase in their relationship.
Carla Brown was a beautiful young woman, was very popular in her hometown in the Wood River area, was one of those girls that everybody knew. Girls liked her, guys liked her. She was just one of those people that was special, and everybody recognized that.
On June 21st, Carla Brown took the day off from work to unpack.
Yes, the house is great.
And spoke to one of her friends on the telephone.
Maybe we can have you over for dinner.
They had talked for a few minutes. In fact, we even talked about getting together later on that afternoon.
Wait a second, I just heard something at the door.
And Carla interrupted the conversation and said, "Listen, I'll have to call you back. I'll see you later. There's somebody at the door." And that was the last that her friend ever talked to her.
Around 5:30 that afternoon, Carla's fiancé and his friend stopped by the house after work. When they walked into the basement, they saw a horrible sight. Carla was lying face down in a bucket of water.
She had her hands tied behind her. There was evidence of struggle, a death struggle in the basement, and a very strong suggestion of a sexual rape.
But investigators were confused about some of the things they saw. There were two men's socks tied around Carla's neck. They were tied neatly, inconsistent with what you would expect to see in a life and death struggle. The white electrical cord used to tie the victim's hands was not tight enough to effectively restrain an individual during an assault.
There was too much length of cord behind her to where her hands could come up in front of her. It would seem like to me that she would have access to the attacker, given that much freedom with the length of rope that was tied between the two wrists.
She was found wearing a sweater her fiancé said she would never wear in the summer. The top button was fastened, another inconsistency with a life and death struggle. The socks around Carla's neck were from inside the home. The mate to one was found in her fiancé's dresser. The other was under the sofa in the adjacent room. Under the sofa was a puddle of water tinted with blood. The sofa cushions were also wet, and there were blood drops on the floor near the sofa. In the rafters was a coffee carafe from the kitchen. To homicide investigators, it looked as if the coffee carafe had been used to rinse blood from the sofa cushions. The attack occurred near the sofa, and the body was later moved into an adjacent room and placed into the barrel of water. The crime scene staging told investigators that the perpetrator spent a great deal of time inside the house after the murder. But who knew that Carla Brown was home and alone on the day of the murder? And who would have felt free to spend so much time in the home cleaning up and staging the scene? Police began their investigation with a close look at Carla Brown's fiancé. The autopsy report on Carla Brown indicated death by strangulation. Although she was found nude from the waist down, there were no signs of sexual assault. Investigators were convinced that the killer spent a great deal of time in the house after the murder staging the crime scene.
I didn't know Mark very well, although they had dated for a number of years, off and on. And there were times in their relationship that it wasn't great, but she seemed to always be crazy about him anyway.
Police also questioned two neighbors who had been sitting in the yard next door on the day Carla and her fiancé were moving in.
Hey, Carla Brown. I'm John Pranty. We went to school together. Remember me?
Hi, how are you?
Both men had alibis as to where they were on the day of the murder, and they both willingly took lie detector tests and passed. With no other leads, police asked the FBI for a psychological profile of the killer and turned to FBI behavioral analyst John Douglas.
In my research, we began to break down crimes by disorganized and organized. Disorganized means extremely sloppy, carelessness on the part of the offender. The crime could be very, very impulsive. Organized means that there's a high degree and high level of criminal sophistication on the part of the subject.
To Douglas, this crime scene was disorganized, an indication that the killer was inexperienced and probably had never killed before. He came to the home with no intention of committing murder, but did so after some sort of confrontation or rejection. Since he spent so much time inside the home, Douglas believed that he was familiar with the victim and her routine and might be living in the neighborhood or very close by. Douglas said the killer was an unmarried white male in his mid to late 20s, high school educated, with a sloppy appearance. The use of electrical cord to tie the victim's hands indicated the killer had taken shop classes or had vocational training. Douglas also told investigators that they may have already interviewed the murderer and that he was capable of passing a polygraph test.
And then it got kind of spooky. I mean, I was sitting there and I wasn't sure I was believing what he was saying after a certain point. He started talking about how this individual would react and what kind of vehicle he'd be driving. And he started talking about a Volkswagen. There was a high probability this guy would be driving a Volkswagen, and that it would be red or orange in color.
This led investigators to focus once again on the two men sitting next door on the day Carla Brown and her fiancé were moving in. But investigators needed more than just a psychological profile. They needed hard evidence. Crime scene technician Alva Bush remained deeply troubled by the Carla Brown murder. For one thing, he and his colleagues could not determine what caused the wounds on Carla Brown's face and chin. The first real break in the case occurred when Bush attended a seminar on image enhancement at the University of New Mexico. Dr. Homer Campbell taught that seminar. He worked for the state of New Mexico as a medical investigator. Dr. Campbell was demonstrating a photographic technique that uses cameras, monitors, and computers to show details of crime scene photographs that cannot otherwise be seen.
This was a technique that had been used for several years, both by engineers in non-destructive testing of materials and also by archaeologists, looking at aerial photographs to find ancient ruins.
After the seminar, Bush told Dr. Campbell about the Carla Brown case.
And I said, Doc, do I have a case for you? And I told him about the Carla Brown case and that we were never able to identify what type of instrument had damaged her face.
I asked him to please send me the photographs that they had of the deceased person, and also to send me an autopsy report.
Dr. Campbell used his image enhancement equipment to look more closely at the crime scene photos of Carla Brown. The system not only improves the contrast of the photographs, but can also create what appear to be three-dimensional views, adding depth to the image. When Dr. Campbell was through, he knew what caused the injuries to Carla Brown's face.
He tells me that the TV tray may have been the instrument that she was hitting the head with. This TV tray was lying on the floor within 3 foot of the victim, where she had probably been on the couch. but I had missed it.
The tray tables were still in storage, untouched in the 2 years since the murder. In an extraordinary piece of luck, Dr. Campbell found microscopic traces of blood and hair still present on the tray table. And what Dr. Campbell said next was even more revealing.
He says, "What about the bite mark?" And I said, "Bite mark? What bite mark? What are you talking about?"
When we looked at the photograph and went ahead and enhanced it and magnified it, present on the shoulder was a bite injury on the shoulder. And by looking at that bite injury, you could actually pick out individual teeth all the way across.
I mean, I'd trade that for 5 eyewitnesses anytime. Because eyewitnesses can make mistakes, things like fingerprints don't. And it was my understanding that bite marks properly preserved with an identified defendant could give you the defendant as good as a fingerprint.
The killer had left behind a clue. All investigators needed now was a suspect.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Two years after the brutal murder of 22-year-old Carla Brown, investigators got the break they needed when a photographic enhancement revealed a bite mark on Carla's shoulder. Police now turned to the two men sitting in the yard next door when Carla Brown moved into her new home. Both matched the FBI's behavioral profile of the killer. Police checked their alibis again. Although both had passed the polygraph tests, police discovered that John Pranty had spoken about the murder to others.
John Pranty had mentioned to his friends that he had seen her body that day, that he had looked over the shoulder of some policemen while they were investigating in the basement, and he described the condition of her body, and he even mentioned that she had bite marks on her neck and collarbone.
The police were the only ones inside the house after Carla Brown's body was found.
And that was a shock to us as police officers, because there's no way that he could have known that unless he put the bite mark there. Also, the information about the location of the body, the way the body was found, the only way that that would have been known is either to have been there on the investigation or to have put the body there yourself, because we never released that information to the public or to the media.
Since the bite marks were overlooked during the original autopsy, investigators wanted to make sure nothing else was missed. So Carla Brown's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. This time, it was performed by Dr. Mary Case, the chief medical examiner for St. Louis County.
In the original autopsy, there was the ligature strangulation, and the body was examined, and for some reason the head was not examined. And so I opened the cranial cavity, and there was bruising in the scalp. Somebody struck her on the head. And question is whether or not, for example, this blow would cause loss of consciousness.
Dr. Case thought that Carla Brown may have been alive when she was placed in the barrel of water, because when she was found, there was foam around her mouth.
Because she was in water and she was producing that foam, I feel like there may be some component of drowning, that she was still, even though she'd been strangled, that she was still maybe to a minimal degree breathing, because I believe that she may have breathed in some water.
During the autopsy, more photographs were taken of the suspected bite wounds, which were sent to the New York State Police Forensic Unit for an independent evaluation. Prosecutors wanted to make sure that the mark on Carla Brown's neck was, in fact, a bite wound.
In my opinion, the pattern injury on Carla Brown's neck had all the characteristics that a bite mark would have.
Dr. Levine was asked to compare the bite wound to 3 different dental casts prosecutors sent along for analysis. Dr. Levine had no idea to whom the casts belonged. After making wax impressions of the models, Dr. Levine concluded that 2 of the models were not consistent with the bite wound.
I took the third model and examined all the individual characteristics that those teeth would have caused, compared those characteristics with the characteristics on the clarified photograph of Carla Brown's neck that I had, and came to the opinion that only that model was consistent with having caused that pattern injury or that bite mark.
He measured the teeth. He went back to the photograph. He turned them different ways. He held them up in the air. Finally, he laid the dental impressions on the table, and he pointed to him and he said, "That's your man."
Model number 3 belonged to John Pranty. Interestingly, Pranty also matched John Douglas's psychological profile. He was in his late 20s, had a history of troubled relationships with women. He attended industrial art school and had a sloppy, unkempt appearance. Pranty spent a great deal of time in the neighborhood, often visiting his friend who lived next door to Carla Brown. And just as John Douglas had predicted, Pranty had passed an earlier polygraph test. The most unusual aspect of Douglas's profile was the prediction that Pranty would be driving a red Volkswagen.
Where that came from, only John could say. But in fact, it turned out that the individual did have a Volkswagen.
Prosecutors believe that when Carla Brown's fiancé left for work, John Pranty walked over and knocked on the door.
Maybe we can have you over for dinner.
Carla was talking on the telephone.
I understand.
Hello?
Wait a second, I just heard something at the door. Let me call you back. What do you want?
Need some help moving in?
I want you to leave.
Want to talk a little?
I want you to leave now.
There was some kind of argument or struggle, possibly after she had rejected Pranty's sexual advances. He forced her into the basement and hit her with a tray table. At some point, he bit her on the shoulder and strangled her. Afterwards, he staged the scene to make it appear to be a sexual assault. But when he changed her clothes, he made the mistake of fastening the top button, the first clue that the scene had been staged. He tied her hands with electrical cord, wrapped the socks around her neck, and placed her into the water while she was unconscious but still alive. Pranty tried to remove the bloodstains on the sofa with water he carried from the kitchen in the coffee carafe, which he left in the rafters above the sofa. The clothes Carla was wearing that day were never found. Pranty may have taken them as a trophy. In July of 1983, John Pranty was tried and convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 75 years in the state penitentiary.
He got caught because the techniques of investigation and law enforcement completely overpowered him. He got away with the crime because he was lucky. He got caught because law enforcement changed his luck.
Don Weber, along with journalist Charles Bosworth, chronicled the many ups and downs of this case in a best-selling book, Silent Witness.
Carla's family was so intrigued by the bite mark evidence that she embroidered a little tapestry that she presented to Don Weber as a token of her appreciation, and it offers the slogan that Don had used, that you can lie through your teeth, but your teeth don't lie. And around the border is the pattern of rectangle, space, triangle, which is the bite mark pattern that Don had proved had been made by John Pranty.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Fire, do you have an emergency? Yes, I need rescue. 2145 Northeast 124th Street.
When investigators arrived at the scene of a shooting, they found a most knowledgeable witness. The victim's husband is a homicide detective, and he said the shooting was an accident. It took a photograph, a forensic scientist's own blood, and the flexibility of a tendon to solve the mystery. Pilar Sánchez Nicolau enjoyed an international upbringing. She was born in Valencia, Spain, educated in Paris, then moved to the United States, where she took a job as a nanny in Boston.
She was very culturally knowledgeable. She could speak the three languages, our native language, Valencian, Spanish, and French, fluently. And she loved everything that involved the Spanish or the French culture. She really did. But then she adopted the American way also very well.
Not long after moving to the United States, she met Ted MacArthur, a Boston area policeman.
He was good to her. She fell in love with him. You know, why do you love somebody? Because they were very attractive.
The couple married, had 2 children, then moved to Miami, where Ted got a job with the local police and quickly rose through the ranks to become a homicide investigator. Pilar got a job in the county's criminal justice system as a corrections officer.
You know, inmates can be very vulgar, very, very rough. She was just so sweet that even the inmates couldn't cuss her out.
On August 1st, 1989, the MacArthur's 2 children were in Boston visiting Ted's family. At 8:33 a.m., Ted frantically called police.
County Police and Fire, do you have an emergency? Yes, I need rescue. 2145 Northeast 124th Street. My wife was around with a gun and just shot herself.
Is this a house or a park?
This is Sergeant MacArthur from Homicide.
Okay, Sergeant MacArthur, this is Priscilla. Where is she shot?
She's in the head, please. Hurry.
Okay, they're on their way.
An ambulance arrived a few minutes later. Ted was performing CPR on Pilar, but it was no use. 8 minutes after they arrived, medical personnel pronounced Pilar dead from a single gunshot wound to her head. Don Slavonic headed the investigation. He recognized Ted MacArthur as a fellow homicide investigator.
I didn't specifically know the man. I knew the name. I had seen him at a homicide school maybe a year before. His reputation was that he was a good investigator.
Ted told his colleagues that his wife jokingly put the gun to her head and pulled the trigger, not realizing the gun was loaded. Pilar was trained in the use of firearms, and her family was immediately suspicious.
I don't believe she was going to do something that stupid. She had more common sense. She was more intelligent than that.
You don't play with guns. And that's the bottom line. Especially if you're any type of law enforcement person.
But could forensic science reconstruct what really happened? "35-year-old corrections officer Pilar MacArthur was dead from a single gunshot to her head. Her husband, homicide investigator Ted MacArthur, was brought in for questioning.
Do you swear that the statement you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Ted said Pilar was asleep, and he playfully used a toy water pistol to wake her up. He said he went into the bathroom to refill the water pistol, and when he returned, he saw Pilar jokingly holding his police revolver to her head.
And she said, "Don't worry, it's not loaded." And then it went off.
Ted said he immediately called 911, then put Pilar on the floor and began CPR. At the scene, police found the water pistol Ted referred to. The bullet wound was on the left side of Pilar's head, supporting Ted's account of what had happened. There was only one empty cartridge in the gun's chamber. 5 unspent shells were on the nightstand, meaning it was possible Pilar thought she had emptied the gun and didn't realize it was still loaded. And investigators tested Ted's hands for gunpowder residue, which would have been present had he fired the gun. Those tests were negative. But Slavonic was too experienced to merely accept the word of a fellow officer. When he spoke to the couple's friends, relatives, and co-workers, Slavonic learned there were problems in their marriage.
There was a few people that had good things to say about him, but most of the people that I spoke with didn't share a very good opinion about him. He wasn't an overly personable man.
And Pilar told friends that her husband was spending money faster than they could make it.
And she was telling me, he's withdrawing $200-300 at a time, and I don't know where this money's going.
There were times, several months before her death, she would go and write a check for groceries, not realizing that he had taken all the money out and the check bounced.
And when Pilar looked in her husband's wallet, she saw the reason for his extravagance.
It was a picture of a woman sitting on a bed with a little nightie on, and I said, so what happened? And she says, I asked him, and he said it was just a case.
But Pilar worked in law enforcement and knew the numbers written on the back of the photograph were not case numbers.
That's when she decided she was going to investigate herself. Instead of hiring somebody, she decided to do it herself. And she started to go places and ask people. And then one day, she's in a bar, and she saw him with her, with the lady in the picture.
I asked him in the interview if he was dating anyone. He initially denied it, and then he said yes, and he didn't want to give her name up. And I go, you don't understand. This isn't open for debate. Who is the lady? And I want her name right now.
Ted identified his girlfriend as the crime reporter from the Miami Herald newspaper. To save their marriage, Ted promised to end the affair. For her part, Pilar did everything she could to make her marriage work.
She was making an effort, making yourself look good, losing the weight, getting a makeover, changing your style of clothing to include, the naughty lingerie and stuff like that.
Ted promised Pilar he would buy her a $30,000 luxury car and made a deposit on a new home. A few days before Pilar's death, Ted arranged a romantic evening for his wife. He lit candles, drew a bath, and brought a television into the bathroom so Pilar could watch her favorite programs while relaxing in the tub.
And he put the TV up and he hooked it up. And then he said, I forgot something.
And on his way out of the bathroom, he accidentally brushed against the television and it fell into the water. Fearing she would be electrocuted, Pilar frantically kicked the TV out of the water.
He explained it as an accident and, said he was sorry and it was nothing but an accident. And I said, do you believe him? And she said, yeah. I said, okay.
This alleged accident, just 5 days before Pilar's suspicious death, was quite a coincidence. When forensic scientists looked into Pilar's shooting, they found even more surprises. Investigators asked forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee to examine Pilar MacArthur's bedroom in an effort to determine what really happened on the day of her death. The first thing he noticed was that Pilar's hands were completely clean.
Her hand should have some high-velocity impact spatter, because when you pull a trigger, when fire pin hit the primer, and rapid oxidation create a lot of force. That force pushed the bullet forward, impact the side, and blood spatter will project forward, also backwards.
And Ted told investigators that he moved Pilar's body to the floor immediately to perform CPR after the shooting. But Dr. Lee saw something suspicious. There appeared to be too much blood on the pillow.
We weighted all the blood cross. Then times the factor, we developed the formula, estimate how much blood original has. And if somebody lost that much blood, it takes a while, not going to be a few seconds.
By weighing the dried blood, Dr. Lee determined that Pilar lost 1/3 of her blood volume, from 1,000 to 2,000 cc's, while her head was on the pillow.
1 to 2,000 cc of blood. That's quite a bit of blood.
From that volume, Dr. Lee estimated Pilar had been on the bed for about 15 minutes before Ted moved her to the floor. This contradicted Ted's story that he moved Pilar to the floor immediately after the gunshot.
So within a minute or few seconds you move the body. Already, how that much 1 to 2,000 cc blood got deposited in the bedsheet? Doesn't make sense.
Dr. Lee then read the statement of the policeman who arrived at the shooting scene within a minute of the 911 call. He said that the blood on the bed had already coagulated. When blood coagulates, the serum, which is clear, separates from the cells and platelets, which are red. The blood smear on the bed, created when Ted moved his wife to the floor, showed clearly that the serum had separated from the cells. This meant that Pilar's body had been moved after the blood coagulated.
Now the scene could be a staged scene.
To find out how long it takes human blood to coagulate, Dr. Lee drew 500 cc's of his own blood for an experiment.
You cannot use Red Cross blood. Those are blood preservatives, EDTA. So fresh blood has to come from a human source.
At room temperature, it took 15 to 20 minutes for Dr. Lee's blood to coagulate or separate into its components, proving that Pilar had been dead 15 to 20 minutes before the paramedics arrived. But it didn't prove that Pilar was murdered. That information would come from ballistics expert Dr. Vincent DeMaio, chief medical examiner in Bexar County, Texas. The first thing he saw was that the wound was on the left side of Pilar's head, yet Pilar was right-handed.
You can't say just based on that he was lying. But that she used her left hand is kind of a flag that makes you think, maybe you should look a little harder on this case than you would normally.
Dr. DeMaio knew the exact position of the gun because he could see the outline of the gun's sight on Pilar's skin.
It was a contact wound, and imprinted on the skin was the imprint of the muzzle of the gun, so that I knew how the muzzle of the gun was oriented.
When he placed the gun in the same position with the correct angle of the bullet's downward trajectory, he discovered something interesting.
Let me demonstrate. If we sweep up this way, and then we'd have to turn it this way. The problem is the way your hand is twisted, the tendons are pulled, and you cannot pull the trigger, no matter how hard you try, because the tendons are stretched. In this position, of course, you can. This position, you can't.
That ruled out an accident or suicide and proved that someone else must have fired the gun. The only other person in the bedroom that morning was Ted MacArthur.
In fact, the gun was held against her head in this position. And so, really, the person who solved this case and proved it was a homicide is the husband. Based on his account and based on the findings at autopsy, it was obvious he was lying.
Ted MacArthur went before the public to proclaim his innocence.
I faced the death penalty in this case. I was offered a plea early on in this case. I wouldn't plead to making an illegal left turn in connection with this case. I did absolutely nothing wrong.
Soon, it would be up to a jury to decide.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Ted MacArthur claimed that his wife put a gun to her head as a joke and that it accidentally went off and killed her.
There are enough real homicides in Dade County that occur on a regular basis than to try to take an accidental death, for whatever the reasons are, and to turn it around and to do this.
Prosecutors believe it was cold-blooded murder and that Ted's motive was money. The couple's bank records revealed Ted was spending lavishly on his mistress. He couldn't afford the new house and car.
He never was going to buy the house because he couldn't afford it. He wasn't going to buy the car because he couldn't afford it. All these other issues were simply a show to make his wife think that he was trying to save their marriage.
And Ted took out a $250,000 life insurance policy on Pilar.
5 weeks before she was murdered. That is suspicious.
Added to existing policies, Ted stood to collect $470,000 if Pilar died accidentally. To solve his money problems, end his marriage, and start a new life with his mistress, prosecutors believe Ted killed his wife and tried to make it look like an accident.
He gets money. He's a recipient of sympathy. He has a glowing reputation. No one's going to question him.
Almost 4 years after Pilar's death, Ted MacArthur was charged with first-degree murder. During the trial, a relaxed, confident MacArthur stuck to his story that Pilar was joking around when she accidentally shot herself.
I remember screaming to her, the gun was loaded, and she was smiling at me, and she said, "No, it's not." And at that point, my feelings are that the gun was coming away from her head, and it discharged.
But the forensic evidence showed otherwise. Prosecutors believe that Pilar was probably sleeping on her right side when Ted fired the bullet into her left temple. He took the remaining bullets out of the gun and put them on the nightstand, wiped the gun to remove his prints, then washed his hands to remove the gunpowder residue. All of this took time, about 15 minutes. In this delay, Pilar's blood coagulated. Ted MacArthur made the mistake of shooting Pilar on the wrong side of the head since she was right-handed. And he could offer no explanation why Pilar's hands were clean and her fingerprints were missing from the gun, all telltale signs of Ted's deception. Even though he was an experienced homicide detective, MacArthur was unable to stage the perfect crime.
What happened is they got a very detailed explanation of what happened, so he couldn't change his story, and they recorded it. He, in turn, didn't realize the significance of the statement he was giving. He didn't realize that there was going to be a muzzle imprint.
A jury found Ted MacArthur guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Without the forensic, this case probably remains unsolved. Because the forensic evidence, we was able to impeach his alibi, his statement.
He thought he could get away with murdering his wife. He thought people would believe it. He was wrong. His wife is dead, but he's paying the price.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Up next, a restaurant robbery goes wrong.
There was no reason for this to happen, Stephen.
This was a vicious attack. And the evidence is contradictory.
There was somebody else bleeding at the scene of the crime.
That blood and the partial fingerprint were all investigators had.
I wasn't holding my breath for any real results.
Until the money trail provides investigators with a vital clue. Jennifer Holmes remembers Super Bowl Sunday 2001 for one reason. It was the day she first met her husband. They were both at the same Super Bowl party.
And I saw him sitting there with the perfect hair and his leather jacket, perfect smile.
A year later, the two were married. And 29-year-old Stephen became a father to Jennifer's young son. They also had plans to have children of their own.
As far as his career, I noticed this about him. He was always happiest when he was working in a restaurant.
Stephen was an assistant manager of a steakhouse in St. Petersburg, Florida. He often worked long hours, and some nights were longer than others.
He called me at 10:18 and said, "I'm just letting you know I'm going to be later tonight because we had a late party and I just closed up. I just let everyone out and locked the door."
Around midnight, an exterminator entered the restaurant with his own key.
That's when he saw the bloody footprints and he saw and found Mr. Holmes' lifeless body.
Stephen Holmes had been stabbed to death.
I've never seen a crime scene this horrific. It was a pretty bad scene.
In a clear case of overkill, Stephen was stabbed more than 40 times.
When you think of a murder, you sometimes think, okay, somebody is shot or maybe they're stabbed. I mean, this was a vicious, vicious attack. He was almost decapitated.
Robbery appeared to be the motive. About $8,000 was missing from the safe in the manager's office. This was much more than usual because the restaurant had been promoting $100 gift certificates as Christmas presents that evening.
It's at a restaurant. You're in the month of December. Generally speaking, a fairly busy time of the year. So we had all pieced together that that's what the motive was.
The exterminator who found the body was the first and most obvious suspect, but was quickly written off.
Due to his demeanor, how he looked, and not having any signs of violence or blood on his person, they could see that he was nowhere near involved in this case.
Fortunately for police, the restaurant had several surveillance cameras.
When we saw the camera was present in the hallway, our initial reaction was that we may very well have not only the attack on video, but at least a starting point of how the suspect was built and his race.
But there was an immediate setback. All the cameras were hooked to a single video recorder, and it was gone.
The entire VCR the cords were actually cut and removed from the office.
There were no signs of forced entry. Was it possible that a customer hid in the restaurant until closing time in preparation for the robbery? If the killer was a customer, that meant dozens, if not hundreds, of potential suspects. Friends, family, and co-workers had difficulty understanding why Stephen Holmes had been murdered. The restaurant had never been robbed before and was located in a low-crime area.
Robberies usually don't result in this type of repeated violence. Very rarely in armed robberies does the victim sustain this many injuries.
Stephen's best friend and co-worker, Wilson Santillo, was among the first to offer his condolences.
I heard wailing. I came inside and it was Wilson in the living room crying. My wife consoled him and grabbed his shoulders and just said, think about Stephen's smile and he would forgive whoever did this. And I think he started wailing more.
The day after Stephen Holmes' murder, a man working across the street from the crime scene contacted police.
This individual indicated that a white pickup truck with a horizontal stripe along the side of it raced out of the Durango's parking lot prior to the police arriving.
The witness said this happened at about 11 o'clock, just after the time police believe Stephen was killed.
The description was so detailed. I mean, a loud muffler, stripes on the side, a small pickup.
For 2 days, police officers stopped dozens of trucks that fit the description, checking the interiors for blood and the drivers for any fresh wounds. Then, they got a devastating setback. The witness now said he made the whole thing up.
He was trying to score points with his girlfriend, is what it basically boiled down to. That's a week's worth of work, and it's down the tubes, and it's very disappointing.
As family and friends mourned Stephen Holmes, police wondered who would want him dead.
Nobody who knew him, as far as I was concerned at that time, could have hurt him, especially like that.
We'd interviewed a lot of his friends, a lot of family members, some co-workers. You could not find a single person that would say anything bad about him.
Defensive wounds showed Stephen fought his attacker to the end.
He had over 24 defensive wounds, I believe, and 20 wounds to his neck and his face. It was obvious it was a very big struggle.
Part of the struggle started inside the kitchen area, and it made its way down that small hallway into the doorway of the office. And then right there in the office is where the final struggle took place.
It appeared Stephen tried to make it into his office and shut the door. There were actually stab marks on the door.
There was a large concentration of blood on that door. There was a huge amount of blood on the floor. The victim very well may have slipped on his own blood.
There were dozens of footprints made by the killer. Unfortunately, there were no clear impressions for comparison.
It was someone that may have had a pair of galoshes or boots, cleanup type boots, handy, or actually had them on at the time they left the murder scene.
But it appeared the killer left evidence as he removed the surveillance equipment.
The suspect had to actually step over the victim that he had just killed. The VCR was up off the counter area of the desk. I believe that the suspect utilized part of that desk to reach up, cut the cord, and take the VCR.
On the floor underneath that shelf, investigators saw a manila folder. When they turned it over, they found something.
We looked at it closer and we actually noticed the fingerprint in blood. Myself and Mr. Carlisle looked at each other and said, "We got him."
Was it possible the killer accidentally knocked it onto the floor as he was stealing the security system VCR?
The folder, the fingerprint wasn't face up, so the person who, as they were leaving, probably wouldn't have known that they had left that essential piece of evidence.
But it was a partial print and badly smudged.
The technician and I were going back and forth, and I'm like, well, I think I can use it, but let's see if we can make it just a little bit better, and hand it back to him.
But enhancing it would come at a price.
That would actually destroy the DNA profile of the blood that the fingerprint was left in.
Investigators decided the risk was worth it. The print was sprayed with amido black, a chemical dye that reacts with the proteins in blood.
He worked on it a little bit more, and we decided that was as good as the print was going to get.
The result was the partial print of a fingertip. Investigators entered the print into the nationwide fingerprint database of known criminal offenders, and the result was bad news.
I did do an APHIS search. I was not able to come up with the match.
That's because the print didn't have enough points of comparison for the computer to process. With no print match and now no DNA, investigators were no closer to solving this murder. In an attempt to find Stephen Holmes' killer, investigators wanted to make sure they identified every piece of potential evidence in the restaurant. The murder took place in Stephen's office in the back, but investigators noticed small circular blood drops on the counter near the sink in the kitchen.
It was obviously close to the crime scene, but far enough away that we were hoping that that was in fact the suspect's blood.
Blood tests revealed it did not belong to the victim, Stephen Holmes.
Somebody had to be standing over the table and blood dripped off of him onto the table.
But if the blood was the perpetrator's, why was it there, and why didn't he clean it up? These almost perfectly round blood drops, called passive drops, were made by someone standing still, possibly while washing his hands at the sink.
A lot of times in a knife fight like that, the knife may slip out of his hand and cut his finger or something similar to that effect.
The blood DNA was possible evidence, but investigators had no one to compare it to. With no sign of forced entry, the killer could have been an employee. So investigators asked restaurant employees for DNA samples and their fingerprints. They also wanted to see if anyone had cuts or bruises on their hands.
They say, you know what? Let's bring all the employees in and let's fingerprint everybody. At least if we do that, maybe we can rule everybody out with the fingerprint that we've got now.
But as police were fingerprinting the employees, they didn't notice any with visible injuries.
Authorities are thinking the killer's probably not here. He's probably not an employee.
It was basically something that had to be done to further the investigation, but I wasn't holding my breath for any real results.
Nevertheless, each employee was fingerprinted carefully.
This would be the front of the finger, but the print I had was more off to the side. So in order to make sure I got the area I needed, I had to fully roll each and every finger of each and every employee.
And in a shocking development, the print on the manila folder matched the last person anyone expected, especially Stephen Holmes's family. It belonged to Wilson Santil, Stephen's best friend, the restaurant's maintenance man and prep cook. Stephen's family couldn't believe it, since the two often worked late together.
Stephen would bring in CDs specifically that he knew was the type of music that Wilson liked so that they could put them in and it would go through the whole store and they could be listening to that music while they were working.
Wilson Santil went to the ceremonies to honor the deceased. He hugged family members, cried when it appeared to be appropriate. There was no flight issues. There was no obvious signs that we needed to suspect him of anything.
But investigators naturally went further, comparing Santil's DNA to the blood droplets on the kitchen counter and faucet.
Those 6 foreign male DNA profiles found at the scene did match the suspect in the case.
The 51-year-old Haitian national was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Do you have anything to say at all?
They got the wrong guy. That's what
They got the wrong guy?
Yes.
You didn't kill Stephen Holmes?
I don't.
You don't know anything about it?
Steve was my good friend.
Although Santil's blood and fingerprint were both at the scene, police had a problem. There was a plausible explanation for his blood to be at the sink in the kitchen.
The defense is pretty clear. He's a maintenance worker. He's a prep cook. People cut themselves all the time.
And there was no proof Santil's fingerprint was in Stephen's blood. It could have been there previously. Needing more, investigators looked into a possible motive. Why would Wilson Santil want to kill a man he called his friend?
People thought that Wilson was a hard-working guy, good family man, good father.
Until a background check revealed a secret past.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Wilson Santil insisted he had nothing to do with Stephen Holmes' murder. The father of 3 was active in his church and well-liked by his co-workers. He even considered the victim his best friend. But a background check revealed Santil had a violent past. 20 years earlier, Santil served 4 years in prison for aggravated assault and concealing a weapon. And despite working 3 jobs, he had money problems.
He was paying child support, from what I understand, for 2 different children, and the amount, when I add it up now, it's probably the amount's like $700 or $800 a month. It was quite a large sum of money.
The forensic evidence clearly pointed to Wilson Santil as the man who killed Stephen Holmes inside the steak restaurant. But investigators wanted to know what happened to the $8,000 missing from the restaurant's safe. That's when they learned that Santil visited a local furniture store the day after the murder. The furniture store had a security camera in the office, which showed Santil paying off a $1,200 debt in cash with $100 bills. Much of the money stolen from the restaurant was in $100 bills from the gift certificates they'd been selling on the night of the murder.
We know that there are $100 bills that are stolen. The fact that he pays off this debt at this furniture rental company so quickly after the murder is... it's just bizarre.
and forensic testing found a connection between Santil's fingerprint in Stephen's office and his blood drops near the sink.
You had feet print leading to the manager's office, and you had shoe prints leading from the office to the kitchen.
Prosecutors believe Wilson Santil was desperate for money and believed his only recourse was to rob the restaurant where he worked. As the maintenance man, he stopped by after hours, knowing the cash receipts would be in the safe. Santil probably made some noise in the kitchen. Stephen walked out of his office to see who was there.
What?
That's when Stephen saw the knife. Stephen ran to his office and tried to close the door, but Santil was still able to get inside. Stephen was stabbed more than 40 times and died in his office. As Santil washed his hands and the knife, his blood, possibly from a bloody nose from the fight, dropped onto the kitchen counter and faucet. Santil took the $8,000 from the safe. Since he knew the surveillance cameras had captured the fight, he cut the cables and removed the video recorder. But as he did, he left his partial fingerprint on the manila folder, which fell to the floor upside down. Santil left the restaurant with the murder weapon, video recorder, and his bloody clothes. Prosecutors believe he returned later to clean up the blood. But his plan fell apart when he saw the exterminator was there on an unscheduled visit.
Stephen's the only person that knows that this guy is showing up. And again, thank God that he shows up on that night, because that narrows the timeline, that preserves the crime scene at that point, and that prevents Wilson Santil from coming back and cleaning up the crime scene.
When Stephen's family learned that Wilson Santil murdered their son, they were shocked and angry because it was Santil who came to their home hours after Stephen's murder to offer his condolences.
When we found out later it was him, it's a weird feeling that he had the nerve to come here to our home to see. It's still hard to comprehend that.
Wilson Santil was tried and convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Santil left evidence behind. Some he might have explained, having worked there as an employee, but not all of it.
I think forensic science is amazing. That's what solved the case. It just puts that much more of my faith in the system, and I'm glad that it's progressed to where it has, and I hope it continues to do so.
Forensic science in this particular case is 110%. It's the reason Wilson Santil is in prison, and without it, he would be a free man today.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
A computer hard drive holds hundreds of secrets. Every keystroke, every download, every deletion tells a story. But if someone downloads a song about murder, does it make him a killer? It was a hot August night in Jacksonville, Florida, and a time of celebration for April and Justin Barber. It was their third wedding anniversary, and April was about to finish her training as a radiology technician.
April Barber had gone into the field of oncology, specifically radiology-type treatment for cancer patients, which was inspired by her mother's death with cancer.
Justin had good news, too. He just got a job as a financial analyst for a large lumber company.
He was a very good guy. I mean, very smart, very successful. Everything going for him. I mean, just like my sister. I mean, they were two of a kind, I guess.
The couple's anniversary dinner was at an Italian restaurant. Later, they took a walk along the beach. But their romantic evening ended there, when a man with a gun demanded money. April diverted the man's attention. Justin tried to grab the gun. Shots were fired. And that's the last thing Justin remembered. When he regained consciousness, he realized he had been shot and was bleeding. He found April unconscious and face down in the water. Justin dragged April's body about 100 yards toward their car, but his wounds made it impossible to carry her up the long flight of stairs. So he left her near the boardwalk and drove for help. He flagged down a motorist a few miles away.
What was your emergency?
I think somebody's been shot.
Is he conscious at all?
Yeah, he's conscious. They're trying to keep him that way.
Okay, do you see a gunshot wound, sir?
Gunshot or stab?
Oh, so he's
I
bleeding.
can't actually tell.
Justin told the ambulance crew that April was down on the beach. By the time they got there, she was dead from a single gunshot wound to her face.
People were calling me, telling me my sister was shot. I was in shock. It was nothing I expected.
At the hospital emergency room, doctors treated Justin for 4 gunshot wounds. He survived, but was unable to provide a good description of their attacker.
Justin couldn't see his face. It's too dark. And truthfully, I believe that it is too dark to see anybody's face out there.
At the beach, police didn't find much evidence, just the impressions from Justin dragging April's body in the sand. And the tides were rising. Soon, there would be nothing left of the crime scene. Initially, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. A man demanded money from April and Justin Barber while they were walking on the beach, and they were both shot. But robbery may not have been the motive.
When they looked at April Barber's body, she had on her jewelry, an expensive ring, earrings, and her watch. If this were a robbery, why was nothing taken?
At the autopsy, the medical examiner discovered foam around April's mouth.
The foam was still present around her nose or mouth, or both, and it's due to the damage the salt water causes to the lining of the lung.
Dr. Steiner also noticed that the blood from April's gunshot wound was on top of the foam. This meant that April had almost drowned but survived and was shot afterwards.
My conclusions were that she had suffered a near drowning episode and she had been shot while she was alive. If she had been dead from the drowning, there wouldn't have been any vital reaction to the gunshot. There wouldn't have been a hemorrhage into the sinus.
But why did the autopsy findings differ from Justin's version of the incident?
It would be very traumatic. The incident itself was very traumatic to him if it had occurred as he stated. His wife is now missing. He's been shot 4 times. And I wouldn't expect a lot of detail from a person who just went through that type of traumatic experience.
Eventually, as Justin recuperated from his wounds, he provided a much better description of the assailant, good enough for police to create a sketch.
He was taller than me, heavier, but he wasn't overweight, strong. Right. His shirt was dark, it was baggy, his t-shirt. Right. He had a dark hat on, like a baseball cap.
Incredibly, the police sketch resembled a local man, 30-year-old David Allen Shuey, who had previous arrest for sexual assault. In fact, Shuey allegedly used a gun while committing an assault on the same beach where Justin and April were shot.
He went down to the beach to find a female.
She was sunbathing, topless on the beach. Gentleman somehow confronted her, certainly intended on doing some type of sexual assault, sexual battery to her.
Fortunately, the victim got away, but she later identified Shuey as her attacker. So police questioned Shuey regarding his whereabouts on the night of April Barber's murder. He denied any involvement and claimed he had an alibi.
We ran all his credit cards because he was all over the country, unfortunately, committing rapes. We know from his credit card records that he was in Connecticut living with his fiancée at the time of this homicide, so we absolutely know he was not the assailant.
Next, investigators looked into Justin Barber's background.
I talked to Justin, and I said, well, tell me about your marriage. We had a happy and normal marriage. Have you ever had an affair? No, never.
But investigators dug deeper and learned that Justin was having an affair with his tennis partner, Shannon Kennedy.
So I'd say, Justin, listen, here's the deal. I got Shannon in the next room. She's saying y'all are engaged in an extramarital affair. I'm going to bring her in here, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. He's like, no, don't do that. We are. I don't want to get her involved. So I'm thinking, well, why in the heck is this guy lying about this? I mean, your wife is dead. Don't lie to the guy that's trying to help you. I mean, who knows where that could lead.
And April's friends told police that she knew all about her husband's affair.
I mean, she told everybody would listen to her. That Justin's having an affair. I know he is. I confronted him about it.
At the time, it appeared that he was only dating one other person, but it appeared that he had as many as 5 extramarital affairs and during the 3-year marriage.
Police asked Justin Barber for permission to search his home, and he was happy to comply. He also made his computer available. Justin's computer went to Chris Hendry of Florida's Computer Evidence Recovery Section.
When I made a copy of Justin's home computer hard drive, the next thing I did was go through and look for anything that would have been deleted, such as folders and files.
One of the first things Hendry noticed was that Justin downloaded a song onto his computer just hours before his wife's death.
The lyrics are violent. They're about killing somebody.
It was a song by the group Guns N' Roses with the lyrics, "I used to love her, but I had to kill her. She drove me nuts, and now I'm happier this way."
It's kind of strange. This is deleted hours before we actually got the machine.
Was this merely a coincidence? After all, it was only a song. Justin Barber told police that a robber shot his wife April in the head and shot him 4 times while they were walking on the beach. He claimed he passed out, later regained consciousness, and found his wife face down in the ocean. But the forensic evidence contradicted parts of Justin's story.
She had evidence of abrasions on her collarbone, by her ear, and on the back of the neck. They are consistent with force or pressure being placed there. Could this have been caused by forcibly being held in the water? Yes.
And on Justin's computer, forensic experts found evidence of a possible motive. Apparently, Justin had been trading stocks on the internet, and he wasn't doing very well.
We have his e-trading. He got himself quickly into $50,000 to $60,000 in debt just on that. It didn't appear that any of his trades really paid off and lost quite a bit of money.
To cover the losses, Justin borrowed money against his credit cards at very high interest rates.
You can't get any worse than that. I mean, you're borrowing money at 21% to pay off money that you lost in the stock market.
Justin Barber should have been a little bit brighter with his money. I mean, that was the time of low interest home equity loans.
That's really significant when you talk about somebody who's a finance major and has an MBA in business. And also it's important to note the psychological effects of a lot of consumer debt. That affects people's psyche.
Also suspicious, investigators learned that April owned a $2 million life insurance policy, which she bought primarily to support her younger brother and sister in the event of her death.
You know, we didn't have our mother, we didn't have our father, and so April felt like it was her responsibility to take care of us. You know, and if something happened to her, and Justin knew that too, and that was a big part of the reason for those.
But Justin was the sole beneficiary, which meant he could have done anything he wanted with the money. Was this enough motive to kill his wife and then shoot himself 4 times to cover it up?
Risky, but people do a lot of crazy things for over $2 million.
Using an ultraviolet light, crime scene reconstructionist Jerry Findlay examined the shirt Justin was wearing on the night of the attack.
You could see some visible gunshot residue, or what appeared to be gunshot residue. And looking at it with the ultraviolet light, I wanted to see the extent of the pattern.
The gunshot residue could have come from Justin being in close contact with the assailant. But the angles of the bullet wounds to Justin's body were another matter. One shot went through his left hand. The other 3 shots were directed away from vital organs and bone. A remarkable coincidence.
To me, the location of them was not consistent with a mugger, even somebody struggling over a gun. If you've already shot and killed one person and you've shot another one 4 times, you're not going to leave a witness.
Investigators also analyzed April's clothing and found another inconsistency. Justin claimed that he carried April's body 100 yards up to the base of the stairs after they had both been shot by the assailant.
One of the gunshot injuries that he had sustained is on his left hand. So his hand would have been bleeding quite a bit, and there should be blood all over the waistline, the waist, and the front of those pants of April Barber, and in fact there was none.
If she's bleeding from this gunshot, one, she did not have it on her body or clothing, and he doesn't have it on his. So I think that speaks for itself.
And by the direction the blood traveled from the wound, investigators could tell April's body had not been moved after she was shot.
Blood flow on April Barber was in one direction, which was straight down to the left from the gunshot wound, and if the body had been moved in various positions, the blood flow would have changed.
And finally, there was something else that bothered investigators. Why didn't Justin use April's cell phone that was in her purse in the car?
Why wouldn't he just call on her cell phone anyway and get help? He had to get rid of the gun.
Unfortunately, police couldn't find the murder weapon in the thick vegetation along the 10-mile stretch of road. But they did discover one last tantalizing piece of evidence on Justin's computer, almost more valuable than finding the murder weapon.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
On Justin Barber's computer, forensic experts found email evidence of his extramarital affairs and financial records proving he was deeply in debt. But that wasn't all. Forensic experts also discovered that in the weeks and months leading up to April's murder, Justin searched various websites looking for information on blood loss and gunshot wounds to the right chest.
What's the chances of somebody researching that thing very specifically, gunshot wounds to the right chest, and then 6 months later getting shot in the right chest? I just don't believe that's possible.
Prosecutors believe that when April Barber learned about her husband's infidelity and his financial problems, she wanted a divorce. Prosecutors also believe that Justin wanted the $2 million from April's life insurance policy. So he searched computer websites to learn how to shoot himself without inflicting serious injury. Justin believed if he drove to the hospital with gunshot wounds, everyone would believe his robbery story.
Justin Barber wanted it all. He wanted, in my belief, to show up with his bride in the SUV at the hospital as a hero, as somebody who is not only a hero but also a victim. Collect the money, have everybody feel sorry for him, move on with his life from there.
But it didn't turn out that way.
They say when you commit a homicide, you make about 30 mistakes, and you can't remember but about 5.
The first mistake that night happened just after 5 p.m. Justin downloaded the Guns N' Roses song, I Used to Love Her, but I Had to Kill Her. Prosecutors believe that April told Justin over dinner that she wanted a divorce. After that, Justin enticed April to go for a walk along the beach, possibly to continue their discussion about how to end their marriage amicably. But right away, his plan fell apart. Perhaps April sensed something was amiss, or she saw the gun. Either way, there There was a struggle. Justin subdued her by holding her head under the water until she lost consciousness. He then carried her towards the car. But there was no blood transfer because at that point, neither one was bleeding. He fired a single shot into April's head. The blood from her head wound was now on top of the foam produced by the near drowning. Justin then shot himself 4 times, careful not to break any bones or hit vital organs. But the excruciating pain and the daunting task of carrying April's body up the long flight of stairs required a change of plans. He had no choice but to leave April's body there. Justin got rid of the murder weapon somewhere along the highway, then tried to gather his thoughts and compose a possible explanation for the water in April's lungs. He drove for 10 miles, passing numerous homes and businesses along the way, before he asked a fellow motorist to call 911. Perhaps the oddest piece of forensic evidence was that Justin erased the Guns N' Roses song from his computer just an hour or so before turning it over to police.
And it's hard to hear that he did it. I mean, he was somebody I trusted and that I looked up to. I'm very sad about it. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my sister.
In June of 2006, Justin Barber went on trial for the first-degree murder of his wife, April. The forensic evidence was simply too much to overcome. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Investigators describe it as one of the most unusual and cold-blooded cases they've ever seen.
If you take somebody like Justin Barber, who's probably a sociopath, who's probably narcissistic, he looks at everything as how it suits him. He did not want the stigma of a divorce.
There were no independent witnesses other than the decedent and the murder. And, there were only 2 people on the beach. So in this case, forensics made the entire case.
But the truth of the matter is, with the physical evidence we have, once we developed it, analyzed it, and had it in its final form and compared it to the story, it revealed that Justin Barber is a liar.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Up next, a human skeleton is found in the marshlands of North Carolina.
The longer a body's been dead, the harder it is to determine how long it's been dead.
We don't know who she is. We don't know why she was killed.
But it tells a story all its own.
Whatever happened to precede death, it probably was sexual.
A story of anger and hatred.
At what point does a person realize that, they're dying?
And a violent end.
Had this person remained anonymous, we would have had nowhere to go.
On a cold spring afternoon in 2004, Rayleigh Jacobs found what looked like human bones in the backyard of the home he rented in Wilmington, North Carolina.
It was kind of gruesome. We came across these bones. It was horrible. First we seen her leg bones, and then we came across her skull, and ribs, and, then we realized, it wasn't fake, it was real, so it was terrible.
He called authorities, who moved quickly to collect the remains and any possible forensic evidence.
The bones that had been scattered by the animals and maybe by the tide coming in, because that wasn't marshland. It was a dump site, and there was a lot of garbage back there.
Anthropologist Dr. Midori Albert and her team of student volunteers recovered about 160 bones, or 80% of the skeleton. The victim was a Caucasian female, about 30 years old, and from the length of her femur, about 5 foot 4 inches tall. The amount of decomposition indicated she'd been dead for approximately 18 months, and it was clear the woman died violently.
When I see injuries that were as extensive as this particular case, I'm sort of perplexed by what the victim was going through while sustaining these injuries and how long death might have occurred.
The woman had a broken nose, broken ribs, and had been stabbed with a sharp object numerous times in the lower abdomen.
It indicated to me somebody who might have been stabbing or mutilating this individual. Stabbed 50 times. At what point do you just not feel any more stab wounds?
The lack of clothing found near the remains was also telling.
The nudity would indicate a certain behavior pattern. They would indicate that whatever happened to precede their death, it probably was sexual.
Fennell believed it was a clear sign of rage and a possible indication the killer knew the victim. He also believed the killer was familiar with the area.
Someone knew that they could get back there and hide this body there without being seen while they were hiding the body.
Because Ray Jacobs had lived in the rental home only a short time, he wasn't considered a suspect in the homicide.
Whoever put the bones there or done this, I was afraid that they would probably come back or, show up unexpectedly, and, so I didn't really know what to think at the time after that.
The first order of business was to identify the victim, a task that wouldn't be easy. According to the Doe Network, an organization that tracks the number of unknown victims, there were 100 other cases involving unidentified victims in North Carolina alone. Investigators hoped that forensic anthropology could narrow the search.
Obviously, in order to do any kind of investigation, you have to start with figuring out who this person is.
The victim found in the North Carolina marsh had suffered a violent death. She was beaten, stabbed, and her nude body left in the marsh in the cold of winter. But who was this person?
Her remains were laid out in the lab, and she was somebody I saw every day. Every day I go in the lab and turn the lights on and work on another case, or we hold a class in there. I would look over at her and often wonder how long it was going to take to get any kind of confirmation.
Investigators had a theory that the killer was local.
It had to be someone who had some familiarity with that particular plot of land.
And if the killer was local, the victim might be as well. So investigators searched missing persons reports for Caucasian females living in a 50-mile radius who disappeared in the last 18 months. This yielded a number of possibilities, but the closest match was 31-year-old Scarlett Wood. She was unmarried and living at home so she could care for her mother, who was suffering from liver cancer. On the night she disappeared, she told her mother she was going to a party with friends.
It was in January, and it was cold, and I woke up with the funniest feeling. You have a superstition. And I said, well, Scarlett, I got a bad feeling something's going to happen. I said, you just stay here tonight. She said, no, I'll be all right.
But Scarlett never returned.
She was always good about checking in with them, saying where she was going to be, if she was going to be home at a certain time.
Investigators hoped to compare Scarlett's dental records with the unknown victim, but their attempt was unsuccessful.
She had dental records, but they were 10 years old, and I couldn't find any dentists that kept their records that long.
And initially, scientists couldn't use DNA testing either.
They couldn't pull the DNA from the remains from the bones. Apparently, the bones are too dried out.
Investigators were facing the very real possibility that their victim would never be identified. Then, forensic anthropologist Dr. Midori Albert had an idea.
I'd been familiar with a procedure called skull photo video superposition, where you take an actual skull and you can take a photograph of a person and actually blend the two images together. And what we tend to do with that is we look for different anatomical landmarks and points of similarity.
Unfortunately, the University of North Carolina didn't have the facilities to perform this procedure. The hardware and software can cost as much as $35,000. So Dr. Albert did the next best thing. She asked one of her colleagues to improvise.
I went to Shane Baptista on campus, who is a computer guru and is very familiar with open source software, which is software that is available to anybody as a free download.
Baptista found a free program called GIMP, or GNU Image Manipulation Program.
GIMP is an unfortunate acronym. Pretty much feature for feature an equivalent of Adobe Photoshop.
To see if it worked, he performed a forensic test on himself.
I sat myself down and set up a web camera on a computer and took some photographs of myself at what I tried to get to be the same orientation.
He superimposed his photo over a plastic skull. He separated both images into quadrants and looked for consistencies in the images. As he expected, there were none.
I was able to get a creepy image that showed that that wasn't my skull, which we pretty much knew.
Baptista moved on to the ultimate test. Pictures of Scarlett Wood were superimposed over the skull of the murder victim. The similarities were immediately apparent.
It kind of lined up pretty quickly, and so it was the ease of the fit got me pretty confident at the outset that we were on the right track.
It seemed possible that the victim was Scarlett Wood, although investigators still weren't 100% certain. But at least they had somewhere to start. With a skeleton found on private property, investigators first turned to the property owner and the residents as potential suspects. Investigators learned that there were two tenants living on the property at the time of the murder, both men in their mid to late 20s.
They both had some histories with law enforcement of questionable character.
The landlord told police the men moved out a year and a half earlier, which would have been around the time of the murder.
They have left in a hurry, leaving behind furniture, clothing. There was some women's clothing left in the house, some underwear, that kind of thing.
Hoping for answers, police found one of the men in Hampstead, North Carolina, 28 miles away, and brought him in for questioning.
Everything, did you guys have parties after the house? What kind of purpose do you have? Neither one of us got anything to hide.
Well, how do you know that?
The man said he knew nothing about the murder and never met Scarlett Wood. He said he and his roommate weren't getting along and they moved out of the rental property after living there only a few months.
Just roommates breaking up, money issues.
Police weren't so sure and sent a forensic team to search the house. All of the floors, walls, and ceilings were sprayed with luminol, but they showed no signs of blood.
After interviewing the tenants and the previous tenants, we were pretty much at a standstill.
Next, investigators interviewed all of Scarlett Wood's friends, and her best friend, Lynn Bollinger, said she knew where Scarlett was headed on the night she went missing. She said Scarlett spent every Friday night at a local motel where there was usually a party.
They were at a motel, partying, drinking beer, and just having a good time. I believe it was Scarlett and three or four other people.
Police interviewed several individuals who attended that party. They said everyone left around 2 a.m., except Scarlett and a friend of hers, 47-year-old John Wayne Boyer.
John Boyer is a truck driver. He actually worked at a couple of different locations here in Wilmington.
Boyer no longer lived in the area. He had been interviewed by police after Scarlett disappeared.
They were partying and drinking. Scarlett wanted to leave. And he said he didn't want to leave, and she left.
Boyer said she left around 3 a.m. on foot. At the time, no one really believed Boyer's story that Scarlett would have walked home 7 miles away in freezing cold temperatures.
She was not equipped for the cold. It was about 17 degrees that night. I believe she had on just a pair of jeans and with a light coat.
But John Boyer had no criminal history, and he and Scarlett were acquaintances.
She used to babysit his ex-girlfriend's children, so he had a personal relationship with her.
Scarlett's friends, however, despised him.
My father had his own trucking business, so we knew about this man. He was really big. He drank a lot. And he acted fine, but there's something about him I just didn't like, I didn't trust.
Investigators were able to locate the minivan Boyer owned at the time of Scarlett's disappearance.
We ended up finding that van and doing a search on it, and we ended up finding nothing in it.
They also searched the hotel room where the party took place.
The room was examined for blood. We used the luminol to determine if there was blood.
Unfortunately, they had redecorated that particular hotel room, so some of the furniture was new, but there was no evidence found of any kind of bodily fluids or blood or anything like that.
Unsolicited, a psychic called suggesting Scarlett's body was dumped in an industrial area about a block away from the hotel.
Myself and my partner at the time went out to the scene, went out and looked around, kicked the bushes, that kind of thing. But didn't look at anything.
Again, investigators were at a standstill. They had no DNA proof that the skeleton was Scarlett Wood. They had no blood evidence to prove that there had been violence in the hotel room or in John Boyer's van. In fact, they had no evidence at all.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Using a technique called facial photo superimposition, a forensic anthropologist made a preliminary finding that the unidentified skeleton was 31-year-old Scarlett Wood. But this wasn't an identification that would hold up in court. Investigators had sent the remains to an outside forensic laboratory, hoping to get a DNA profile. But for reasons no one can quite understand, the lab was unsuccessful.
We would never know for sure who our victim was without the DNA. I'm not sure what that is, but they just couldn't pull the DNA from the bones. So they just advised us like almost a year and a half later that just couldn't do it, just couldn't find DNA.
Nothing seemed to be coming of the analysis. And after the first year passed, we were quite disturbed and very upset about it.
Undeterred, investigators sent the skeleton for a forensic second opinion to a private laboratory, this one in Pennsylvania. There, scientists tried drilling into a tooth and found just enough tooth pulp to generate a DNA profile.
Within 3 weeks, they came back with a positive identification.
And with more digging, Sergeant John Leonard discovered that Scarlett Wood had surgery performed on her finger just before she disappeared, and that a biopsy was performed.
By law, I guess medically, they had to keep these things for 7 years, I was told. I spoke to the doctor who did the operation on her, and he advised me that that I could go to the place that stored this biopsy, and I was able to get it.
Incredibly, DNA testing of that biopsy sample matched the DNA profile from the victim's tooth.
When the DNA came back and it confirmed that my victim was Scarlett Wood and that John Boyer was the last person to be seen with her, we ended up going to Augusta, Georgia, and interviewing John Boyer.
At first, Boyer repeated what he told investigators several years earlier, that Scarlett grew impatient waiting for him to give her a ride. She decided to walk home instead and left the motel room around 3 a.m. Sergeant Leonard didn't believe it.
I'm talking to you since 10 o'clock this morning. All we've heard is lies.
Okay, John, because I have a body. I have the body now, okay? So I'm going to be able to tell if you're lying to me. Right. Okay?
And with that, his story changed.
That's when he told me he wanted to have sex. She said okay, but he couldn't perform.
We had a little sex a little bit. We tried it. She got pissed off because I couldn't keep it up with her. And she told me, well, you're just an old man.
She was belittling him about him not being able to perform. He ended up pushing her.
It wasn't bleeding, I know that.
She wasn't bleeding?
No, she was not bleeding.
After you pushed her and she hit the nightstand?
Yeah.
Boyer said Scarlett hit her head accidentally against the nightstand. But Dr. Midori Albert believes it's more likely her head was pushed into the table forcibly. Prosecutors also believe Boyer broke her ribs. Since it was late, Boyer was able to carry Scarlett's body outside to his truck without attracting notice. He then took her to the marshy field near the trucking company where he worked. The evidence shows he used some sort of sharp object and repeatedly stabbed her, going so far as to mutilate her. And then he left her there.
I learned a lot from her skeleton, and I believe in death she made significant contributions.
In April of 2007, John Boyer pled guilty to a charge of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Scarlett's family still have problems accepting the enormity of the crime.
He never gave a true story as to what really happened. So I don't guess we'll ever really know.
I still don't think Miss Woods has got it in her mind her daughter's not coming home.
Investigators also suspect Boyer was involved in the murder of 26-year-old Rosemarie Mallet, which took place about a year before Scarlett Wood was murdered.
When he saw the photo, he stopped everything and said, I know her. She's a prostitute. I've had sex with her. I want an attorney. So based on that utterance, he is a suspect in this homicide also.
But John Boyer is now behind bars because simple technology available to anyone identified the victim of his crime.
We'd never known that was her. If it wasn't for the forensic evidence, we'd never known.
I'm glad we got this guy. I was really, still am, honored to have been a part of the process and pleased with how the system can stay with it to help this unidentified person gain some justice, to give the family some peace, and to take this bad guy off the streets so that, he's not able to do it again.